the agenda for today's topic. Moving on to slide number 2. We'll go through some of these points of what is a DB2 solution lifecycle. What are the typical DB2 platforms? Many of them get confused as to what is DB2, how does it behave on Linux systems, how does it behave on mainframe systems. So I'll give you an overview about the various DB2 platforms. What are the important considerations for a DB2 environment? Because most of the times we only talk about a database on a system, but there are a lot of other things to it, like what is the platform on which it runs, what are the middleware that it is interacting with. So I'll take you through some of those considerations. Most importantly, what is the type of data and what is the load that is sitting on the database? Example of a typical problem scenario. A good understanding of what is the front end and back end for a DB2 environment. And lastly, about the insight and approach to handle databases from the perspective of an administrator and who can be a platform and operating system administrator, or from the perspective of a middleware administrator. Moving on to slide number 3. I'm aware that we have an audience who's a very right blend of developers, project managers, probably administrators, and who are DBAs or maybe OS administrators. So all of us go through something called as a solution lifecycle, where we start with a design phase. We first gather the requirements, we understand what are the requirements, we work on a design, probably we work on a configuration or a development, and then we go on to implementing it, probably testing it, and then we go on to maintain the environment. We look at optimizing it over a period of time, and if required, we look at upgrading the environment. So the picture that you see on this slide is specific to a database environment, where we start with designing the DBMS. We look at configuring it with the hardware, the OS, and with the platform, and then we go on to implement the database with databases, tables, and the objects of a database. The next thing is maintenance of a database, which is a key for any DBA. Then we look at optimizing the database from best practice point of view, and of course we have upgrades across versions or upgrades of fixed packs and so on. Some things to be noted are not everything is technical in a solution. There is a lot of other planning, there is a lot of capacity planning, a lot of thought process that goes into designing a solution. So most of the times, designing a solution is a teamwork of a specialist and an architect. So it's not something that can be done by one person. There's a lot of thinking that goes into it, which is always a teamwork. When you look at a typical database administrator, there are two scenarios. One is the scenario where we support an existing environment. I guess the DBAs in this audience would be aware that we have application DBAs and system DBAs, or rather physical DBAs and logical DBAs. So what does this mean? Is most of the times the logical DBAs or the application DBAs work with the application developers in understanding the application, what is the requirement. They work on to design the database. But there is another area which is called as the physical DBA, or the actual DBA who goes on into the implementation phase of the database, who works on maintaining and supporting the databases. We have another scenario where we are looking at solutioning a new environment, where we don't restrict that role as a DBA. We rather call them as architects who look at from the time of planning the solution, who look at what could be the capacity of this system, what could be the future scalability of this system, and things like that. So let's take a look at what are the good and bad of both these scenarios. Moving on to slide number 4. The scenario is supporting an existing environment. The primary focus areas in this case is to how best to run the environment. Most of the DBAs, or rather administrators who are supporting production systems or maybe dev test systems, look at how best they can manage the system. They look at technical skill building, where they look at the new features, probably look at what are the enhancements that they can come up with. Their key focus is to establish SME contacts in that area. So their scope areas is typically looking at tuning and optimization, automation, like I said, enhancements, and derive best practices out of their experience and document it and provide tangible results. But there are some gray areas because most of the times as DBAs, when we have performance issues or when we go through severe issues, we know that there are a lot of things that we can fix, but there are few things that we cannot change, which is like the design of the database. Although we can still go back and try to change the design of the database, we know how much of a big deal it is to actually go back and try to make an impact over there. Also, the product selection is not in our control because for experience guys, we know that probably this database works best on this platform, or probably AIX works best with DB2, or and it could be anything. So that way we cannot do anything at that point of time because the product selection has already happened and you're just managing an existing environment. Also, there is no exposure to the business layer here because the business guys usually talk at the business level. So when you're managing a system, you're only in a system, you're only looking at the technical aspects of it. You only see how to fix the problem and how to maintain it, but you have no clue about how to get into the business layer of it. So in this case, again, say if I'm a DBA of a particular database, I know that I have this database, I might know the host name, I may know the port number, I may have details about the user IDs and things like that, but I may or may not know to what all other interfaces my database is talking to. So the architecture here is somewhere unknown and unexplored. So what we have observed is the approach is slightly more confined in this case. Moving on to slide number 5. So this is a second scenario where we are looking at solutioning a new DB2 environment. So in this case, we start with something like a functional requirement. So for example, how much of RAM is required, how much of CPU is required. So these are requirements which are required to functionally run the system, or which are required for the functional working of the particular solution. There are some of the non-functional requirements which include costing, performance, availability, and so on. So the focus area here is rather consulting. Some of the scope areas here is platform. So we need to have good understanding of what is the hardware that is used, what is the operating system we are loading on it, storage and backup, very, very important. Some of the areas like capacity planning and scalability. So here, when you design a solution, it becomes the responsibility of the consultant or the architect. It becomes the responsibility of the consultant or the architect to actually make sure that. Am I audible?
Disturbance from your end, Ashwini.
Okay, I'll continue. Sorry for. Can you hear me?
There's some disturbance from your end.
I guess it should be fine now. Can you hear me?
No. Yeah, it's fine now.
Okay, so you're connecting me back?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible?
Ashwini.
Okay, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. You can start now.
Okay, thank you. So sorry for the interruption. I'll continue with where I stopped. We were looking into slide number 5, a second scenario where we are looking at solutioning a new DB2 environment. So in this case, some of the scope areas for us would be to understand the underlying hardware and operating systems, the storage and backup, capacity planning and scalability. So importance of this is we need to arrive at building a solution in such a way that 10 years down the line it is still valid. Not after a year where we look at and say, it's not the right solution and we try to scrap off the whole thing and try to rebuild the solution. So that's not the idea of a good solution. So that is where we look into some of the aspects of capacity planning and scalability as well. And one of the best advantages here is the product selection, because based on experience without exhibiting a product loyalty, we have a freedom of choosing the right product with the right platform and right environment. Also, of course, depending on how much of funding and licensing you can afford. So how does it help here? We have a thorough exposure to the business layer. We have an understanding of the overall architecture, and this way we get an idea of the various behavior of products on various platforms. So that gives us a broader picture of the whole environment, thus helping us to manage the solution. Moving on to slide number 6. So this is a table which gives you an idea about, it's the simplest categorization of DB2 for various platforms. You see 3 rows over here. The first row is IBM System X, which we call as the X series, where we can load Windows, Linux or VMware